the escort right there, the convoy. And I just wanted to share that with our viewers as we continue to take a live look. But, Andrew was sharing some of his favorite, inaugural speeches. Do you have one?
Yes. I mean, if you look at inaugurals, Andrew, as you've said, the message of unity is what's most important. And you see it again and again. A lot of these inaugurals are a genre that, follows kind of a pattern. The president starting off humbly thanking the voters, essentially saying, I'm not sure I'm up to the task, as George Washington famously said in his very first inaugural. And then going through and saying, as Thomas Jefferson did in 1801, this dispute with Adams, he said, then we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans, meaning we're all Americans. And after hard campaigns, a president needs to unify the country because the president's going to be governing the entire country. And so that's a very important message. I've seen that Trump is intending to talk about unity. Actually, if you look back at his speech, the American Carnage speech from 4 years ago, he actually did talk about unity there too. And so it is a really important message. But if you ask me, what are the important inaugurals? Obviously, Washington's, Jefferson's, and then I agree with Andrew, both of Lincoln's, but especially Lincoln's second inaugural, which was very important. Again, the country then torn apart by war and 600,000 Americans losing their lives, huge change in the country politically. And Lincoln chose that occasion to say, with malice towards none, with charity for all, let us bind up our wounds. That's the kind of message that you need to have after you've had a rough and tumble time, and especially when you've had, such a severe war. The other two that I really like are Franklin Roosevelt's 1933, The Only Thing We Have to Fear is Fear Itself, where he tried to calm the nation in the midst of this Great Depression. And it was a really important message that calmed the fears in the country that, banks closing and things like that. It was a really difficult time. His message was one of fortitude and, bucking up the American people. And then my absolute favorite actually is JFK's 1961 inaugural, when he talked about, let the torch be passed to us. And then, we need to be a country of service. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's a wonderful, beautiful speech, very well put together, beautifully delivered on a day not unlike today. It was about 22 degrees. You can see the breath. And Kennedy got up, no hat, no overcoat, and gave this very stirring speech that is worth watching, and I think considered one of the top 2 or 3 inaugurals.
Jim, I also wanted to ask too, because we are in 30 days of mourning as a country in the wake of the death of former President Carter. President Biden issuing the guidance and the order for all American flags on federal buildings to be lowered to half staff. But in the last couple of days, you've heard from Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. You've heard from some Republican governors like Greg Abbott, like Ron DeSantis, and others saying that for today, the American flag should be raised back to full staff. On some state houses, that is going to happen. But we're learning, according to some reports, that Speaker Johnson also had ordered that for the U.S. Capitol. But some reports saying right now that the staff, the crew are trying to bring it back to full staff, but the cords are frozen because it is so cold. I wanted to ask, though, was there a previous time when the nation was under a 30-day period of mourning for a former president or whatever during the time of an inauguration? Can you think of one? Is that unique?
I think it is unique. If you look at our inaugurations, today Trump will become the 47th POTUS, but we've had 78 different ceremonies because every consecutive POTUS, numbered POTUS, if you have 2, swearing in ceremonies. And then we have this quirk of several presidents who died in office. And those presidents, there was an immediate transfer of power to the vice presidents in those situations. That resulted in flags being flown at half staff during an inauguration. It would have been during the time of emergency. LBJ down in Dallas, he was sworn in on Air Force One. Very interesting trivia question there. The person who swore LBJ in was Sarah Hughes, who was a federal district court judge who had been appointed by Kennedy and was a friend of LBJ's. He waited for her to come out. The only woman to ever administer the oath of office.
Wow.
And so you see that famous scene, which really interesting to me because I wrote in my book, January 1973, that she's the one who administered that oath. She was later the judge who decided Roe v. Wade in the lower court.
Wow.
And Wade was the guy who was the prosecutor who brought Oswald out, Henry Wade. So kind of a strange quirk. And then Roe v. Wade is issued on January 22, 1973. Later that day, Roe v. Wade is decided in the Supreme Court. And later that day, Lyndon Johnson dies. So there's a lot of real interesting connections to that story. But, I think when you look at where the country is in terms of mourning a president or a former president, I don't think that's ever happened before. And I think that, to me, this issue is one that is not worth much fighting about. It is what it is. Yeah. And, it's symbolic to some people, so be it. But I think it is the law that you have to keep them at half staff.
And now we're taking a live look as President-elect Trump is arriving at Blair House. This is really just the stepstone, if you will, before he arrives at the Capitol Rotunda. And Jim, you were sharing with us in terms of previous inaugural speeches and previous significant events. As a historian, of course, typically you take a look at the past, but you're also viewing what is happening in real time through that historical lens. And I'm curious for you, when you're taking a look at the historic events unfolding before our very day.
Yeah, Stephanie, it's a good question. I think that given what President